And I will say a few words to introduce this new seminar. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here for for the seminar, both online and offline. Thank you for colleagues who came offline. And yes, I would like to say a few words in order to introduce this seminar, which will be dedicated today to a very important topic, which is the repression of foreign agents and undesirable organizations in Russia. So for this very short introduction, I would like to answer or to introduce 2 points, 2 questions. The first one is why the topic of foreign agents and undesirable organizations is so important for scholars. And the second question is why should we work with OVD-Info on this topic? So this will be the 2 questions. The first one, why the topic of foreign agents is so important for scholars? I consider that this is an extraordinarily important topic for researchers because it is emblematic of the new spirit of repression in Russia. And I consider it's important for all scholars interested in Russian studies and from all disciplines to be well, interested, yes, in this topic. And I would like to stress the need of cross-disciplinary dialogue to analyze the multiple aspects of the repression of foreign agents and undesirable organizations for the last since 2012. So on this topic, I think we need to work with the colleagues coming from different disciplines. I consider we need to work with historians, because foreign agents is a category inherited from the past, especially from the Soviet history of repression in the 20th century. And the question is, how can we have this conversation with historians in order to analyze the revival of this Soviet category in contemporary Russia? So I think the dialogue with historians is very important in order to try to figure out what is happening in Russia now. Of course, we need a dialogue with lawyers in order to analyze the regulations and the laws about foreign agents and their legal and judicial consequences. So to work in the field of law is, of course, absolutely necessary to understand what is happening with foreign agents. We also need, of course, to work with political scientists in order to better understand how the category of foreign agent is at the center of repressive public policy, a public policy with its own agenda, its own decision-making, its implementation, and its evaluation. So to consider this public policy around foreign agents from political sciences. We also have to discuss with sociologists in order to understand who are the foreign agents and what are their social characteristics in current Russian society. So to try to collect data about their social characteristics. Of course, we need also to work with anthropologists in order to understand how foreign agents live with this stigma and all its consequences for their public life, but also for their private life. So because this stigma of foreign agents has consequences in all aspects of the daily life of the persons. And last but not least, probably we should speak with economists in order to study the economic consequences of the regulation on foreign agents regarding financial transfers and economic resources of NGO and media working under these status. So this category is necessary. We need to study this question of foreign agent in an interdisciplinary approach, given the many issues at stake. It's of potential interest for all social sciences researchers, I consider. We already have some articles, academic articles, which were published on foreign agents. So I wanted to give you some examples. I won't give you an exhaustive bibliography, but many articles were already published in English. So we have an article, a paper by Evelyn Moser and Anna Skripchenko, which is called Russian NGOs and their struggle for legitimacy in the face of the foreign agents law, surviving in small ecologies, which was published in Europe-Asia Studies in 2018. We have a paper by Alexandra Orlova, Foreign Agents, Sovereignty and Political Pluralism, How the Russian Foreign Agents Law is Shaping Civil Society, which was published in 2019. Another paper by Goncharenko and Iqbal Kadarou, Disciplining Human Rights Organizations Through an Accounting Regulation, a case of the Foreign Agents Law in Russia. And I myself published a paper in 2015, so a long time ago, which was called The Duality of Coercion in Russia, Cracking Down on Foreign Agents, and it was published in Democratization. So we already have some texts, some articles, but they need to be constantly updated, especially in the context of war since February 2022. And I don't know, maybe it's too big, but maybe we could even think about a collective publication on this question of foreign agents from the different disciplines I spoke about just at the beginning. Second question, why we need to work with OVD-Info on this topic? I remind that the first provisions on foreign agents were adopted in 2012. Until 2022, the legislation on foreign agents was extremely vague and imprecise, disseminated across multiple legislative and regulatory acts that are constantly changing. So the legislation is permanently changing on foreign agents and undesirable organization. In the 2010s, the law changed several times, first affecting associations, then the media, then physical persons considered as media, and physical persons just considered as physical persons. And now it's about people under foreign influence. 4 or 5 registers were created by the Ministry of Justice to register foreign agents and undesirable organizations. But from February 2022, the situation changed. In the context of the war, foreign agents became more clearly enemies from within, and a new law on foreign influence was adopted, and the 5 previous registers were replaced by a single register of foreign agents. So the crackdown on foreign agents is based on a very elastic assemblage that easily adjusts to the repressive agenda of the Russian state institutions, security institutions. The provisions on foreign agents can be used to target different types of people, to target human rights defenders, critical journalists, independent artists, writers, or even scholars, depending on the changing priorities of the repressive context. And this uncertainty can be considered as part of the system, as they encourage legal arbitrariness from the regulatory bodies and power structures. So it's very difficult to navigate through this mass of changing rules and to know who might fall under the law and why. And that is why the work of monitoring legislation, publishing registers of foreign agents, and describing the many categories of registration and the date of registration, the status of people, the field of activities, etc., proposed as part of OVD-Info's Inoteca project is really crucial and important in helping scholars, experts, journalists, but also ordinary citizens to find their way in this massive of repressive rules. So more than ever, know that we can no longer travel to Russia. We need OVD-Info's work to understand the uses of foreign agent legislation in Russia in order also to better understand how repression works in this country. And last but not least, it will be my last word, but I want to underline that the study of repression against foreign agents is also an opportunity to develop comparative analysis, because unfortunately it's a regulation circulating internationally, and it's not actively circulating beyond Russia. And I think that Maxim Krupskiy, which is here online, yes, will address this topic. So I'm particularly looking forward to our seminar today, and I wanted to thank Daniel and the OVD's team for the organization of this seminar today. Thank you so much, and so you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Welcome to our fourth meeting. I have to share the screen.
Okay, tour.
Yes. So thank you. Our discussion today will follow some of the most important tools used by the Russian state to put pressure and to stigmatize the civil society. As Françoise already mentioned, and as we were discussing during the first seminar, the law on foreign agents appeared 2012 after widespread election-related protests. Originally targeted on NGOs, the law has been extended to cover all types of organizations as well as individuals. Before the outbreak of the full-scale war, the authorities constantly presented the law as non-discriminatory, bearing no serious consequences for foreign agents and increasing transparency. Publicly acknowledging existing problems with the law, the authorities, on the contrary, make it more and more aggressive through the years. This picture of existing public debate on the further development of the law gave the opportunity to more than 200 of biggest Russian media and NGOs to demand the full repeal of the law. More than 250,000 people joined this demand in the autumn of 2020. However, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has put an end to these discussions. After its beginning, this legislation, as legislation on undesirable organizations, became even harsher, and its application increased significantly along with the other types of repression. Our conversation today will be focused primarily around the changes since the outbreak of the war and will be divided into two parts. In the first part, OVD-Info will talk about the available data, present a short overview of this data. We will also speak about the notice of the relevant legislation and its application, which appeared during the last 2 years, and about some particular examples of campaigns with the application of this legislation. We often miss the broader context of the development of foreign agent legislation, which is quickly spreading like a cancerous tumor around the world. That is why in the second part, as Professor already mentioned, Maxim Krupskiy, who kindly agreed to speak with us today, will present the analysis of the current trends in the development of transparency legislation and foreign agent legislation in particular, in the bigger context. The data which we will discuss today is compiled from 3 different sources, and we'll share with you today with a link to the online meeting. In this letter, you can also find a link to a computational notebook, which is providing both the data and examples of the usage of this data. Since the inclusion of OVD-Info to the list of foreign agents, we are collecting detailed data about each foreign agent within a project called Indésirables, as Françoise already mentioned. What we are presenting now is the enhanced version of the same data set with the data of justice and information on criminal cases against foreign agent individuals. This version was crafted specifically for this seminar today and shared with you in the email. As of today, the registries contain information on 757 foreign agents. As you may see, the number of foreign agents is growing, and the rating in an accelerating rate since 2021. While the number of new organizations stays more or less the same, the use of this tool against individuals is intensifying. Uh, 203 foreign agents were excluded from registries. However, in the many cases, it happened after the dissolution of organization. As of today, 151 organizations from registry are not existing. At least 304 foreign agents have publicly communicated their anti-war position. This leads to the assumption that this was exactly or part of the reason for some of them to be included in this registry. More than 1/3 of individuals from this registry are persecuted under criminal law for different kind of crimes. Individuals are mostly men between 30 and 50 years old, also quite a lot are over 50 years old, and 13 people are even older than 7. Information published by Ministry of Justice allow us also to look at the data from the regional perspective. We can see that registries includes organizations and individuals from at least 68 regions. On this slide, you can see how the law is targeting specific areas of activity. My colleague will elaborate on this topic a bit later today. The same data set contains information on undesirable organizations. Today, there are 128 of them. This graph is showing how the corresponding registry was expanding throughout the years. Note that in 2023, this list expanded more than in 3 previous years. You may see that this law application is targeted also against specific areas of activity. This picture, even more interesting if you disaggregate the data by the year, but again, my colleague will later talk about this. The second data set, which was also shared with you, contains data from around 250 regional courts on administrative cases related to foreign agents and undesirable organizations. This data set includes text of judicial acts where they were published, more than in 50%. This data set allows analyzing of actual law applications. And on this graph, you can see how many cases were registered by the courts from 2022. Note that the amount of cases doesn't necessarily correspond to the number of defendants. For example, in the first column here, in the first quarter of 2022, many cases were brought against Radio Free Liberty and its representatives. Most of the cases, of course, ended with penalties. However, there are the cases when the judges taken the other. Since the data was passed from the websites of regional courts, we can easily disaggregate this data by the region and understand in which regions this legislation is most actively used. The same data available also for the administrative persecution in the context of undesirable organizations. You can see that this administrative article 20.33 almost wasn't used before 2021. While we know much less about the outcomes of these cases, there is still plenty of cases which can be analyzed. Also from the regional perspective. Finally, I would like to mention the numbers on the criminal persecutions. This data is available through the database on political persecution, which we discussed in a few previous seminars. A bit more information on these particular cases you can also find on the computational book I was mentioning before, which is shared with you by email. Now I would like to give a floor to my colleague Palini Krakina, who will give the overview of changes in the foreign agents legislation and its application since the beginning of the full-scale war. Palina, please take the floor.
Hello, everyone. I will try to briefly outline you the changes that were brought recently to the foreign agents legislation, specifically from 2022 up until now. So one of the main changes was that the actual actions that had to happen in order for the person to be or legal entity to be recognized as foreign agents has been changed. Previously, there was a need for so-called foreign funding, however small. Now, however, what is needed is any kind of foreign influence, which can mean virtually anything. So if you express any view in support of, for instance, Ukraine, or maybe in opposition to Russian actions, you could be recognized as to be under foreign influence of Ukraine. So it is one change that has happened. The second change was already mentioned in the introduction. It is a unified register. So it is mostly technical innovation. All the registers were brought into one, but one of the changes that was made is that now there is more information contained in this register. We can see that there can be a list of employees or participant of a foreign agent, their social security number, if it is a person, or their tax number, previous full names, and pseudonyms for bloggers specifically. Now, not all of this information is necessarily included in the list. Sometimes a list of employees is omitted, or maybe 2 or 3 names are mentioned, but still it seems like an expansion of repression, since all the persons that are mentioned in this register would be inevitably under the same stigma of foreign agent. Also, we can see that in this new register, all the foreign agents that were excluded from this register for whatever reason, they are forever on this list, and that means that their personal data is also forever on this list, even if they're excluded. The other difference is that now there is a separate register of individuals affiliated with foreign agents. Those persons could be founders, managers, members, participants, volunteers, employees of foreign agents, whoever who was connected to these organizations or persons. The problem with this list is that we do not actually have an access to it. It is not public. And while theoretically it is possible to ask for this list, it does to ask for whether you're included in this list, it does sound a little bit like self-denunciation. So I do not know of any instances when it was done. However, there was some information mentioned by officials, and we know that as of December 2022, there were more than 800 persons on this list. These persons are not heavily limited in their rights as of now. Mostly their limitations are concerned with election rights. However, as we can see from the progression of foreign agents legislation, we can expect that they might be subject to further limitations further on. Next slide, please. Now, some other differences. There were further restrictions on the financial support and property support from the state. Many of well-established NGOs have enjoyed certain financial or property support previously, and now we can see that all of the foreign agents in the principle cannot continue to do so. Also, we can see that there is additional control on the persons who are not themselves foreign agents, but who interact with foreign agents and could potentially help them evade the legislation. Now, Ministry of Justice can check these persons and can conduct and schedule inspections. And if persons are recognized to help evade this legislation, they also can be fined in violation of administrative law. Next slide, please. Also, additional prohibitions. As you can see, it is a quite long list. We can see that educational activities are heavily restricted, educational activities among minors, all teaching in government educational organizations, also full prohibition on organizing public events, prohibition on service in armed forces, and prohibition on participation in government procurement and work in different election commissions. It is not actually an exhaustive list, but those are the main prohibitions that were introduced. Next slide, please. We can see that criminal and administrative responsibility were also unified and expanded. In many cases, for administrative responsibility, a new article was introduced, 19.34 of Administrative Code. There is a very, very long list that I won't bore you with today of different violations, such as not giving proper documentation to officials, or maybe not declaring themselves properly as foreign agency in social networks. But the responsibility I will try to outline to you. For persons, it's up to 50,000 rubles and fines, for officials up to 300, for legal entities up to 500. Now, the problem with this article is that it is a prerequisite for criminal prosecution. And if within 1 year you have been prosecuted more than 2 times under Administrative Code, under this specific article, you can be subject to criminal prosecution, specifically parts 1 and 2 of Criminal Code, which implies imprisonment up to 2 years. But we also have a very interesting part 3 of Article 330.1, which actually doesn't even require this administrative prerequisite. And the person can be prosecuted under this part, even if they did not violate administrative law before that, and imprisonment implies up to 5 years. This part is designed specifically for foreign agents who somehow interact with military information. And we recently had the first case under this part of a journalist who is indeed prosecuted in this way and didn't need administrative prerequisite for that. Next slide, please. So here are some pretty numbers for you to enjoy. I just wanted to illustrate some of the cases that were brought to court. So we can see that, well, you've actually seen some of those graphs before that, but we can see that the amount of cases under administrative law rises. We can see that the fines do rise, and we can see that in 2023, there were more than 400 cases brought to court. It does not mean that all of them would be found in violation. There are some procedural issues and so on, but we can see that the amount rises steadily. Next slide, please. Now, not only legislation itself changes, but also how this legislation is applied. And one of the very interesting choices, and specifically related to the beginning of the full-scale invasion, is this new reason for being included in this list, and it is opposition to war, essentially. Here in the italics, I have tried to verbatim show you how this reason can be indicated in the list. It is dissemination of fake information on the activities of state bodies and speaking against special military operation. So out of 411 foreign agents since the beginning of war, we have indicated 304 with anti-war stances and who were included for these stances. Not all of them have this reason of opposition to special military operation stated specifically in the register, only the majority of them. But for some of them, we have indicated this reason from the context. Sometimes the reason may not be stated explicitly. Next slide, please. So here are some graphs to kind of I thought that the text was boring, so I wanted to give you some numbers and pretty graphs as well. That is the composition of foreign agents who were recognized since the beginning of war. We can see that the vast majority of them are anti-war foreign agents, but also we can see different groups as well. On the second place, we can see LGBTQ organizations and activists. Unfortunately, since the beginning of war, there was a very big campaign against LGBTQ rights, and several legislative pieces were introduced to restrict them, and there was extremist, so-called extremist case against this movement. So we can see noticeable amount of those organizations in the foreign agents list. Curiously enough, there is a noticeable amount of indigenous people's organizations in this list as well. And others, there is a variety of other foreign agents as well, such as ecology organizations, so on. Next slide, please. Here I wanted to demonstrate you the graph of how foreign agents were recognized by months of war. So the numbers do not indicate actually calendar months, those are months of war, so from 24 to 24, or from one month to another. And here in the orange, you can see the overall amount of foreign agents. In the blackish grayish color, you can see anti-war. You can see again the vast majority of them are anti-war. If you have been in the previous seminar where I showed you the discreditation graphs, there we can see exactly why certain spikes happened, and we could connect them specifically to certain events. But here, unfortunately, it is much more chaotic, so it would be very interesting to examine why it does rise so much. Next slide, please. So again, just a little bit of a composition. We can see that recently the majority of foreign agents are persons, some of them are associations, and also I've included a small graph for gender composition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alina. I would like to take this opportunity also to announce the report which OVD-Info is going to publish in the next weeks, exactly on this topic, on the changes in the foreign agent legislation and its application since beginning of 2022. That would be the update of our previous big report, which we made this topic before the war. Would be published first in Russian, but then now I would like to invite my colleague Elizabeth Stiglitz, who will remind us what is undesirable organization and summarize the changes in law, its application since the beginning of the full-scale war. Please.
Thank you. So now undesirable organizations is a label that is a repressive label that is used much more rarely than foreign agents one, but it contains more serious accusations and can lead to more serious consequences in terms of criminal punishment. So what is essentially an undesirable organization? The term was introduced to Russian legislation in 2015, and it's used to label certain foreign and or international organization as a threat to the country's defense capabilities or its security. The decision to label someone as some organization as an undesirable is usually made by General Prosecution Office, and such decisions are influenced by parliamentaries, by lobbying groups, and these are the cases that where we know the publicly announced reason for inclusion of certain organizations on the list, because the process is not as it's even less transparent than the one with the foreign agents, because you can't obviously, as being recognized as a security threat, organization cannot challenge such decision in court. and the information that the General Prosecution Office gives on such labeling is usually very limited. So the reasoning behind such labels is often arbitrary, but there is no way to challenge that in court, as, for example, is possible with the under foreign legislation. Next slide. So here are some examples of the organizations included, that organizations that have been recognized as a security threat to Russian Federation. For example, you can see Greenpeace, ecological organizations, human rights organizations, open society foundations, research and academic institutions such as Heinrich Böll Stiftung, Central European University, Atlantic Council, Transparency International, etc., etc. Also, sometimes the list includes religious organizations such as Jehovah's Witnesses and certain Lutheran and Anglican churches. Next slide, please. So, what risks does such label carry for the employees or people associated with their organization? So, for participants or people who have somehow been engaged, there is with an undesirable organization after it has been labeled as such, it can lead to an administrative offense, which can lead to a large fine. But this creates also a possibility for criminal prosecution, because being charged on this administrative article creates a possibility that if you are charged with the same offense within a year after that, this can actually lead to criminal prosecution. Criminal prosecution that can, under the article of being engaged or participation in an undesirable organization. There are also 3 other clauses in this criminal article: organizing and financing activities of an undesirable organization, which require no administrative prejudication. So the person can find out that he or she has been suspected of such activities only after the criminal case has been initiated. So what is participating or engaging with an undesirable organization? This offense can relate to very minimal engagement and very ordinary actions, such as making a repost on social media, participating in a roundtable, or having worked with an undesirable organization before it was labeled as such. I know this contradicts some things that I've said before, that the label only begins to criminalize. The label only carries criminal persecution after the organization has been labeled as such, but there are cases now where this law is used in past tense, in reverse, to against people who have participated in undesirable organizations before they have been added to the respective list. Can we move to the next slide? So what has changed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion? So the scope of the legislation has been broadened, because before 2022, it only included cases of participating or working with an undesirable organization within Russia's borders. Now it covers such activities worldwide. So no matter even so, if a person who frequently travels to Russia, has Russian citizenship, works for an undesirable organization abroad, or comes in contact with it in any way, there can be a criminal case initiated against him or her within Russia by Russian respective bureaucrats. So combined with a rapidly growing amount of undesirables, this has led to creating a far broader demographic that is influenced by the legislation. Can we move to the next slide, please? So here are the organizations that have been added to the list in 2023. In 2023, the amount of undesirable organizations added to the list doubled compared to the previous years. Like, for example, in 2022, we had around 20 organizations. In 2023, we had 51. So what kind of organizations were added to the list lately? Anti-war initiatives, anti-corruption initiatives, environmentalist organizations, research organizations, educational organization, ethnic association, and organizations that provide support for indigenous people, mass media, etc. I think you can see from the slide. Can we move to the next one? I think the presentation is going to be available later. So, for example, let's take a look at the academic and research institutions included in on the list. So, in 2023, we saw 9 major academic institutions added to the list of undesirables. The most severe case was probably Central European University, which includes which has over 100 people of Russian citizens among its students and staff. And such labeling of academic and research institutions serves several major purposes on the state behalf. First of all, it creates legal grounds for repressions against students and scholars who study or work abroad, because this creates immediate threat of administrative and criminal persecution for them. This stops the outflow on students and scholars who maybe plan to go work in other countries. This creates legal grounds to persecute those in contact with such institutions from within the country. For example, people who participate in the sociological interviews, sources, potential collaborators among academics, etc., etc. Last of all, but not least, it creates pressure on Russian academic and research institutions within the country, because they need to keep themselves in check since their previous contacts with foreign and international counterparts can be regarded as a criminal offense. An administrative case was recently initiated against European University in St. Petersburg because it had several books in its library that were printed by the Open Society Foundations while that organization, the latter, was still legal in Russia. So on the basis of 2 books, persecution managed to create a possibility of criminal persecution of academics currently working there. And I think that's it for my part. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next speaker is my colleague Daniel Britton, who will present some other cases of repressive campaigns using tools of foreign agents and undesirable organization legislation. Please.
Thank you. I think I'll just continue to explore a bit more like the cases of these repressive campaigns.
Tanya, I'm so sorry. Hi, I'm so sorry. It's Renata, one of the organizers of the seminar. I just wanted to, Daniil, could you please turn off the mic when there is someone speaking on Zoom, because we have some echo from Paris audience. Thank you so much, and Tanya, sorry for disturbing you.
That's okay. Thank you. You can see on the graph that like the darkest squares of the graph show that in some specific years there was much more significant numbers of particular fields affected by, for example, foreign agents legislation. And you can see here that the first target of foreign agents legislation is media. It kind of always has been, but in the last 2 years, since the start of the war, it has been significantly much bigger amount of organizations affected by this legislation. And the other target of foreign agents is political entities, which is also understandable. Both, well, media is the amount of independent media covering war in Ukraine was quite significant in Russia prior to war, and right now it is the first target to use this legislation because considering everything which was said above by my colleagues about the legislation, about the laws, about repressiveness of the laws, obviously is going to affect this media and how they're perceived in Russia as well. The same goes for political entities because it also affects the financial structure of the entity, the possibility of citizens supporting this entity, etc. And yeah, this graph shows that exactly last 2 years were it was like the first 2 targets of government to use this legislation upon. And the next slide, please. It shows similar graph, but in concern of undesirable organizations, and you can see that it's kind of similar. You can see that main focus is media as well and human rights organizations in 2023, 2022. Both are repressive legislations which really affect the existence of those 2 fields and industries. And it is possible to come to conclusion that because of this repressiveness of these 2 legislations and labels, it is, well, first of all, this government, but it is also other political bodies that can use these legislations and labels as campaigns against whole industries, which are in some kind of ways uncomfortable for them for some reasons. And the next slide, I'm going to talk about 2 examples this legislation can be used. First of all, let's talk about environmental organizations. It is an interesting case because usually it is not the main focus of journalists or researchers who study the topic of foreign agents or undesirable organizations, but at the same time, environmental organizations were always part of both these labels. First, of foreign agents legislation. You can see that there are now 35 environmental organizations affected by foreign agents laws. And it is interesting that there are patterns in which these organizations became foreign agents in Russia. For example, 18 out of these 35 organizations were recognized as foreign agents in 2015. And the rest is like the other years have much lower number of environmental organizations foreign agents, but at the same time, this peak in 2015, it is interesting to look at it because it is something similar happening right now in terms of undesirable organizations, because 6 environmental organizations which are now considered undesirable. Prior to 2023, there was only 1 environmental organization considered as undesirable, and it was in 2018. But in 2023, there were 5 in 1 year, and most of them were like major environmental organizations such as Greenpeace, WWF, or Bellona. And these are quite huge organizations, used to be in Russia, in terms of, support as well, in terms of infrastructure, and in terms of actual, I would say, power, political power. Because, for example, Greenpeace and WWF were working a lot against some, let's call it infrastructure developments in Russia. For example, Lake Baikal. And right now, journalists who investigate this legislation, they think that it is possible, possibly one of the reasons why those 5 organizations were targeted in 2023, because, for example, Greenpeace, WWF were active in protection of Baikal Lake, and it is right now a hot topic still, because businesses want to develop the area around Baikal Lake. And some politicians were actually commenting on recognition of these 2 organizations and saying that they are working in a position to building and developing key infrastructure projects for the country, which is, for example, Baikal Lake development. And it is quite possible. I cannot say right now that it is the reason, but it is possible that, for example, businesses could use this legislation while lobbying in political bodies to actually shut down these organizations and stop their work in the country. And also, which is important, is that yes, most environmental organizations specifically, which are recognized as foreign agents organizations or undesirable organizations, about 1/3 of the foreign agents closed down, and actually every of undesirable organizations closes down in Russia, and it doesn't work there anymore. So it is a quite powerful tool to implement in politics. And the other slide, please. Next slide. No. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and another example of such use of these 2 legislations as a tool of political power is religious organizations. They're also quite interesting example because, if you look at the graph below, I don't know if you can see it quite well, but among undesirable organizations, religious organizations are on top. There are 16 right now. The same goes for political entities, and even less for research organizations or human rights organizations, and even less for media. So religious organizations being on top of this graph is not, it is not obvious to predict that they're going to be there. So the thing is that right now, out of 16, most of them, first of all, prior to 2020, there were no undesirable religious organizations in Russia. So this 16 is throughout last 3 years, 4 years. And many of the affected organizations are actually related to Ukraine. In some ways, some have religious center in Ukraine, or some somehow related through financial or bigger infrastructure with other church or other religious body. And possible reasons for including these religious organizations into undesirable list. It is actual cultural and financial relation to Ukraine, and also possibility of donations to Ukrainian army and support of Ukrainian army. For example, right now there are only 3 persons considered foreign agents while being in religious organizations. I mean, in relation to religious organizations, there are only 3 of them. All those 3 persons were recognized as foreign agents in 2023, and all 3 were talking expressively in support of Ukraine. So it is quite possible that this religious organization and this number 16 became such high because of possible interactions with Ukraine and not wanting the government to, and government not wanting to interact with Ukraine, any religious bodies in Russia. And next slide, please. It's gonna be last. Gonna be the last one. Yeah. So there are a lot of questions why to target the whole industries, and I think there are also a lot of answers. And it is it is a field for exploration right now, because it is, well, first of all, it is quite new legislation and labels. Also because it is quite difficult right now to research this fields, but it is possible that these legislations can be used as tools, not only by the government, but by other political bodies. And it is interesting right now to explore the possibilities, why it is happening and how they can be used in interest of whom and why. And I think that's going to be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now we turn into the second part of the presentation, and I would like to give floor to Maxim Krupskiy, whom I would like to thank immediately for giving us the opportunity to learn more about the development of these laws, not only in Russia, but also in the other parts of the world. I'm going to stop screen sharing and making Maxim the host of the meeting.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope you hear me well.
Yes,
Yes.
perfect.
Oh, no. Maxim? Ah, okay. We are not hearing you anymore. Because you are muted.
Sorry. Yes. So
Yes.
everything is okay. So you see the presentation and yes?
Yes,
Oh,
we can.
Yes.
okay.
We see.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for having me. I just try to start. So my presentation will consist of 3 parts. It will be Russian experience in applying the foreign agents legislation, analyzing international trends that could be observed last year, and assessing the challenges of the foreign agents legislation and possible responses to them. Unlike my colleagues, I will focus on analyzing the legislative rather than law enforcement practice. I just need to briefly remind you the chronological line of the development of the foreign agents legislation in Russia, and a little bit dig deep into the terms and conditions of the current version of it. So, as already has been mentioned, in 2012, this legislation was announced by the Russian authorities as a tool to ensure transparency. And despite this, it was immediately clear to both non-commercial organizations in Russia and the international community that its purpose would be to stigmatize civil society. The first version of the law defined foreign agents as only non-profit organizations that receive money from foreign sources, act including in the interests of those sources, and engage in political activities. And no one had a clear understanding of what all these terms mean, including the legislator. Due to refusal of NGOs to voluntarily enroll in this register in 2014, amendments were adopted that allowed the Russian Ministry of Justice to include organizations in the register at will, forcibly. From that moment, the history of one of the most repressive tools of the fight against civil society in Russia begins. And over the next few years, Russian legislation on foreign agents only become more severe and vague. Media foreign agents, public associations, and individuals were added to non-profit organizations, and also Ministry of Justice started to label them as foreign agents. In 2022, a new law on control over the activities of persons under foreign influence has been adopted, which finally destroyed the meaning of the concept of foreign agent in Russia. I just really would like to introduce you and to show you the real terms of this legislation, because I think it's very important to see them by your own eyes. It's I think it's really, really important to see it, how they formulated by the government. So in this law, the concept of a foreign source, essentially a principle in whose interests the agent acts, disappeared completely without any reservations. So Russian foreign agents are a unique phenomenon, in fact, because there is no such thing anywhere else in the world. You can be an agent of no one without acting in anyone's interests at all. It's a very important feature of this legislation, Russian style, I would say. So, as you can see on this slide, the criteria of agency are defined as broadly as possible, and the Russian authorities have ensured themselves a maximum degree of discretion. Decisions on inclusion in the register are made today in an arbitrary form. But what I should mention, this is a kind of a little insight. So these vague terms and formulations are not accidental. So this is not an accident. This was the conscious intention of the deputies who drafted the law. This slide shows a quote from Oleg Matveyev, a United Russia deputy, one of the authors of the law, and he states that the arbitrariness of decision-making is deliberately built into the law to make it easier to recognize as foreign agents anyone the authorities deem necessary. So this is their viewpoint of how this legislation should be formulated to be effective. So which activities a person or an entity should have to be labeled as foreign agents? So the activities you need to perform to get on the registry are understood to be what you see on this screen. So pay attention, please, to the third point, dissemination of information, including on the internet. That's very important. And I would like to emphasize that this clause literally refers to absolutely any information, including personal and non-political information. In other words, any post of yours falls under this definition. What about political activities? It means that political activity is also understood to mean almost anything. Not the clause of dissemination of options about, opinions about decisions made by the Russian authorities or formation of public opinion. So any public speech on any topic falls under this definition. As all has been mentioned before, this law, this version of law, contains different prohibitions, and I just can skip this slide because, as I said, it has been mentioned before by my colleagues, but I would like to show you how it works in practice. So these are some screenshots of an app for children. And you can see what enforcement of the foreign agents law looks like in literally in practice. So these screenshots are about history. The author of the podcast, Russian historian Tamara Edelman, is one of the register of foreign agents. So she can talk right now to children about, for example, Mesopotamia or history of Mesopotamia anymore. So this podcast is now labeled 18 plus as a, an adult movie or something. This seems funny only at first glance because, for example, teachers or tutors, authors of educational projects for children who may be recognized or labeled as foreign agents will simply lose their jobs if they are less likely than Tamara Edelman, who has a loyal audience and a popularity. Another one example, books. It's the photographs from the last year. So this how foreign agent books looked like in bookstores last year. So note that some stores decided to reinsure themselves and double label the foreign agent book. This is what self-censorship and stigmatization looks like, not on paper, but in reality. So what should be also mentioned is that against the backdrop of the war, the rhetoric against foreign agents has changed significantly. It has become much more aggressive, and the number of foreign agents has increased dramatically, as colleagues have already mentioned today. And moreover, this aggressive rhetoric comes directly from Vladimir Putin and is therefore perceived as a guide to action by lower officials. So it's common terms today: national traitors, foreign contagion, self-cleansing of Russian society, something else. So it's quite common words in today's Russian reality. Here, I just summarized several initiatives from 2023. A large number of different legislative proposals and initiatives were heard in 2023, and they were aimed at threatening the position of foreign agents. And fortunately, only one of these initiatives eventually become law: liability for helping foreign agents to violate the law, as already mentioned by my colleagues. But you can see how severe this initiative. So it's quite important to understand this environment in which the foreign agents legislation is developing and how it can be used by Russian authorities. So what I can say about Russian foreign agents law? In fact, this law violates the right to freedom of assembly officially, the principle of equality of all before the law and the court, the right to defense, because it's impossible to defend oneself when there are no clear criteria for being labeled as a foreign agent in the law. The defense simply has nothing to rely on. And finally, this law is simply unconstitutional. And as you can see here, as I mentioned on this slide, the Russian foreign agents legislation is literally a simulacrum. So it's the status of agent is granted in the absence of indication in the law of any principle in whose interests the activity is carried out, and for activities that are not inherently agency activities. It means are not aimed at deliberately representing anyone's interests. So this is the vivid example of the weaponization of transparency. As I mentioned before, the stated goal of the initiative in 2012 was to ensure transparency. Now we see that foreign agents law has become clearly weaponized and now aims to transparently expose dissenters to the public. So next part of the presentation is about legal trends in transparency and foreign agents laws in 2023 and Russia's role in it. So I should mention that it's not only, Russian phenomenon. Legislation on foreign agents exists not only in Russia. So today it is enforced in dozens of countries around the world, including the United States, Australia, India, Israel, and others. In 2023, several countries decided to adopt their own legislation on foreign agents or its analogs. So as you can see here, in March 2023, the Parliament of Georgia was going to adopt the law on transparency of foreign influence, and the international community and independent human rights organizations inside Georgia strongly opposed this initiative. And fortunately, this bill was rejected after thousands of people protested in Tbilisi for several days. Also, in March last year, in Kazakhstan, has been developed an order of the Ministry of Finance of the creation of a public register of organizations and individuals receiving foreign funding. So literally, it's not the foreign agent legislation, so they don't have such term, but still the spirit of this law, the spirit of this order, in fact, in connection with the tax code of Kazakhstan, is quite similar to foreign agents legislation. And in September 2023, the register was published, and 240 different organizations and individuals were included in it. Commercial, non-commercial, human rights, journalists, and many, many others. And now I'm conducting the comparative research, and now I'm trying to collect some data from Kazakhstan and also from Kyrgyzstan. Because on October 26 in 2023, Kyrgyzstan adopted a draft law on foreign representatives in the first reading, which is almost literally copy of the Russian law on foreign agents of 2012. So the very first version of this law in Russia. Along with this, a new criminal article is proposed that criminal liability in the form of a fine and imprisonment for up to 10 years is envisaged for the establishment of an NPO, participation in it, and propaganda of activities if they are related to so-called including citizens to refuse to fulfill their duties or to commit other illegal acts. And of course, the international community and civil society in Kyrgyzstan have harshly criticized the draft law. And now there are several campaigns inside the Kyrgyzstan, human rights campaigns against this draft of this law. And also on September 28 last year, Republika Srpska National Assembly passed in first reading the draft law on special registry and transparency of the work of nonprofit organizations. And OSCE and other international bodies have strongly criticized the draft law, including, by the way, the Venice Commission, because it seriously violates Bosnia and Herzegovina's human rights obligations and commitments regarding freedom of association and expression. So what is quite interesting, and what I just would like to dig deep a little bit, that the draft transparency directive adopted months ago in the European Union, and it is extremely interesting and wide-ranging. And I would like to analyze it in more detail. It is a part of a large package that is very reminiscent of the foreign agents legislation, although the authors deny this connection. So I would like also to show you and to draw your attention to the reasons that prompted the adoption of this document. So as you can see, we are talking about methods of defense against an external threat, primarily from Russia. I will show you why primarily from Russia. So this is, as you can see, as a part, a press release. So it's mentioned here that democracy also has its enemies. Authoritarian regimes see it as a threat, and some regimes have made attempts to exploit social division and stroke mistrust of established institutions. Direct speech here, it's quotations. So politicians mentioned that we should not let Putin or any other autocrat covertly interfere in our democratic process. We will tackle the threat of foreign interference by a new law mandating transparency. Today's instruments will defend our democratic systems from outside interests and so on and so forth. We will not allow our autocracy to attack our democracies from within. And in proposal for a directive of the European Parliament and of the Council, mentioned that this document proposed because of the Russian threat to democracy, especially amidst the war in Ukraine. So what I also would like to mention here, that despite the obvious need for transparency and response to subversion by autocracies, especially against the backdrop of the war against Ukraine, the proposed document raises questions and, in fact, some concerns. The main reason for this is the vague language contained in the document. As you can see, the explanatory documents state that the concept of representation should be broad. It is also proposed to establish a link not between the activity of the proved fact of influence, but between the activity and the likelihood of influence. And for me, as for practitioner, legal practitioner, is really hard to understand what does it mean, in fact? How can you prove likelihood? With which instruments? How? So I should also show you some definitions from the draft. And the draft itself is quite large. It has more than 70 pages. And of course, I do not have time to analyze it in depth. But I would like to draw your attention to the main terms that are contained in this document. As you can see, practically any public activity fits the description. And it is not necessary to receive money for its realization, in fact, because it's the interest representation service means an interest representation activity normally provided for remuneration. But obviously, it could be without funding. So as you can see here, interest representation activity covers organizing or participating in meetings, conferences, or events, contributing to or participating in consultations or parliamentary hearings, organizing networks and grassroots initiatives, and so on and so forth. And also, by the way, activities in the context of research and education. And why I think it's important to focus on this term is that I really would like to draw your attention separately to the way academic and research activities are described in the draft document. As you can see, the boundary between the ordinary academic activities and those that are subject to registration is very blurred. And it is not clear on what basis a decision will be made as to whether they should be registered or not. And this is the real problem, in my view. So what I really would like to say about that is that its document tells us that we can see a Russian role here also, because the Russia's role in this process, I mean, the process of weaponization of transparency, is quite interesting, because on the one hand, for countries such as, for example, Kyrgyzstan, Russia acts as a positive example and serves as a model to aspire to. And this leads to copying Russian legislation. In turn, in democracies, Russia and its activities in spreading propaganda and authoritarian narratives act as a threat, and this leads to the search for response solution. The reaction to Russia's activities in democracies also inherently triggers a mechanism of this transparency weaponization. So Russia directly or indirectly dragging the world democratic community into playing by its own rules, which should be avoided at all costs. What can I say about the possible solutions for this? So I try to do it very briefly. So key risks of the legislation of foreign agents are this. So first of all, this legislation and its analogs focuses on the subject of activities and information dissemination rather than the content and quality of activities and information. So how to avoid this? To ensure transparency and counter disinformation, it's necessary to formulate clear criteria for reliable information and create algorithms to filter the content of disseminated materials, and also to help people distinguish fakes from facts. The next risk and the next problem is wakeboarding, because such words like political activity, influence, connection between the agent and the principal are quite vague. So that's why we need to formulate the clearest possible terms and definitions. Third problem, the third risk, is the lack of a clear legislative purpose. So in one register, we have negative, positive, and neutral impact, different organizations, journalists, lobbyists, universities, commercial companies, writers, NGOs, lawyers. So we need to create separate registers, and first of all, for lobbyists, if we are afraid of foreign influence and its impact on democracies from authoritarian countries and from autocracies. The fourth risk is stigmatization. We should also avoid it, and we should understand that the term, the foreign agent, is not neutral. It always implies the absence of independent will and agency of an individual or organization, and its activity exclusively in the interests of the principal. And that's why we should abandon the use of these stigmatizing terms and formulate, again, clear criteria for inclusion of individuals and organizations in the register. And the last one risk is the threat of civic and political agency of people, because when we emphasize the subject of activity, we inevitably affect the public opinion. And at the same time, people's assessment turns out to be biased and mediated by the assignment of foreign agent status. So we should give the people an opportunity to receive the clear and reliable and verified information, and give them an opportunity to be free to independently and objectively assess the content they consume. I think I stop here, and then you can see the presentation.